Naruto's early life.
This part of the biography will begin with Naruto's early life. Pablo Neruda, originally born in the town of Parral and born under the name Ricardo Eliezer Neftali Reyes y Baso Alto, was later on raised in Temuco, Chile, 2 months after his mother's death, when he was around the age of 12. Neruda's time in Temuco would be spent mainly learning how to write poetry from the future poet laureate and future Nobel Prize recipient, Gabriela Mistral. The background in which Neruda grew up in would nurture the future that he would see in the world of poetry much later on in his career. At the young age of 13, Neruda began to write poetry starting with his first poem, Entusiasmo y Perseverancia. However, the full effect that Gabriela Mistral had on Neruda's writing would begin in 1915, when Mistral would have actually begun to meet with Neruda in order to work on his poetry. Mistral would strongly impact his style by solely introducing him to European and Russian works of literature. As Neruda began to meet with Mistral more and more, his fear that his father would find him out as each meeting began to grow. This fear brought about the pseudonym that he would use for all of his poems after 1920 in order to avoid his father, which we would know as Pablo Neruda. During his years in high school, Neruda was published in local papers and even won several literary competitions. His poem, Nocturno Ideal, received an award for his local contest in 1919. 2 years later, in 1921, Neruda moved to Santiago in order to attend school at the University of Chile, planning to become a French teacher. However, he was rather apathetic to the studies. This was caused by the fact that his father had been pressing his hopes for Neruda to become a teacher onto him. This lack of interest in becoming a teacher prompted Neruda to take action after creating his critically acclaimed best and most original work, 20 Poemas de Amor y una Canción Desperada. With this set of love poems, Neruda became an important figure to Chile as a representative of Chilean poetry. With the release of these set of poems, Neruda's early career would start. 20 Poemas de Amor y una Canción Desperada was the first explicitly sexual works of literature to be publicly accepted in Chile. This was partially achieved through his references to his love affairs and fond memories of his experiences in Temuco, which would mask the effect of his literature that was considered overtly sexual. While writing his poetry in 1927, Neruda began to travel the world, picking up new topics to write about, as well as new ideas to bring up in his poetry. Instead of picking up on more romantic ideas to write about in his poetry, Neruda learned of the extreme poverty and loneliness that was slowly becoming more and more abundant in the world that he had not yet known. It was from these ideas that Neruda created his 3-part book series of Residencia en la Tierra, each part being respectively published in 1933, 1935, and much later on in 1947. It was through these books that Neruda once again gained a larger following in the world of poetry on an even larger scale. Many who critiqued his books claimed them to be his most powerful works of literature. These books that Neruda published earned him more fame and more respect from the Chilean community, as he was slowly becoming more and more representative of Chilean culture. Matching the time that Neruda was slowly gaining more fame, poets such as Rafael Alberti and Miguel Hernandez began to associate his works with communism and radical movements. Neruda did not deny the claims that his works were being connected with communism and radical movements. Neruda claimed that early on in his works that communism had saved him in his time of despair. However, Neruda would later renounce his association with communism by calling it out and speaking out for the Republican cause. Almost immediately would Neruda receive backlash for this event, which would later force Neruda to move to France as well as Mexico, where his political ideology would not disrupt society as much as he hoped.
Neruda's later life. For the years that Pablo Neruda was traveling around the world, he was appointed with several honorary consulships in places such as Burma, Ceylon, Java, Singapore, Buenos Aires, Barcelona, and Madrid. Being a frequent traveler and a socially active person, Pablo Neruda took part in world conflicts such as the Spanish Civil War, which first sparked in 1936. Neruda helped to chronicle the great atrocities that occurred in Spain through his writings in España en el Corazón. What especially was distressing for him was the death of Federico Garcia Lorca, renowned playwright, poet, and theater director who he knew personally. He was killed by nationalist forces in the Civil War. This close involvement in these events is present in his work, transforming his poetry into pieces that spoke more on political and social problems. In 1939, Neruda was appointed consul for Spanish emigration, residing in Paris, and later consul general in Mexico, where he rewrote Canto General in Chile into an epic poem that told the story of the South American continent and its historical destiny. This collection of about 250 poems was released to Mexico in 1950, but had to be released to Chile underground, as he was forced to flee the country for his political views. Years before this, though, 2 years after he had returned to Chile, along with becoming a senator for Chile, he also formally joined the Communist Party. 2 years after that, in 1945, he was forced to live underground as he protested the president who was passing repressive laws against striking miners. He finally was able to leave in 1949 to live in refuge, but would eventually come back. Communism in Neruda's life.
Pablo Neruda is a poet that has been very influenced by the communist ideals. Neruda, being a communist supporter, helped develop multiple events in his life. Things like interacting with Cuban revolutionary Fidel Castro and supporting the Cuban Revolution. These influences caused the exile from Chile as well by the Chilean president, which Pablo Neruda had supported. As a result of the exile, Neruda paid many visits to Cuba, which then led to the Cubans viewing him as a traitor. You may ask yourself why. Well, when Pablo Neruda returned to Chile after he had been exiled, Chile had declared to be against the Cuban Revolution. Neruda also admired Joseph Stalin, the communist leader in the Russian Revolution, and developed a passion for communism, which created a political activist out of Pablo Neruda and heavily influenced his work.
While it's debatable whether Pablo Neruda's political ideas and opinions were agreeable or not, it's for certain that he did play a role in world politics and world events. He will always be remembered for his literary breakthroughs and how he contributed to Chilean culture, as well as how he's managed to touch countless lives with his poetry.